Hey guys, how's it going? Danny Jones here. I'm just going to talk about stress and exercise today. If you haven't, make sure to check out a previous post. This is kind of what's stemming off of that previous post. So it was talking about different things that you can track in this new year, or if you're ever doing goal setting, if you're ever looking at new goals that you're wanting to hit, then you're going to want to not just look at your nutrition and your exercise, but you're also going to want to look at your stress levels, your sleep, your menstrual cycle, mental health, and many other items. So this is, again, stemming off of that post, but I wanted to look specifically at stress because of the fact that we face stress all the time, and what does that do with our body, and then how does exercise help it? So especially too with this last year, if you're watching this more recently, it's going to be at the beginning of 2021. So we just went through 2020, kind of a crazy year there, quite a bit of stress as well. And so one thing that we can do is that we can look at stress as this negative factor or a positive factor, and that's something that is really important in how we manage our stress, is our perception of stress. So for a quick, easy example, let's say that you absolutely love roller coasters and you go on a roller coaster. That's a great stress. That feels amazing. Like afterwards, I'm always giggling. I'm probably laughing along the way after I'm screaming my head off. But I enjoy roller coasters. Now, take someone who hates roller coasters, hates heights. They're going to absolutely hate that experience, and it's going to be extremely negative, or it's going to be not a very fun time for them, right? Those are two different stressors. They're two different perceptions of stressors. Let me clarify that. They're the same stressor because you're still riding a roller coaster, but it's two different perceptions of stressors, right? So that's the thing, is that we have a perception of stress, and that can alter how we have that stress affect our life. Now, this is known as kind of a maladaptive or an adaptive response, is kind of like your coping or your perception on it. I'm going to dive into that in a second because I have a research article that gave specific responses to each of those coping mechanisms. So this research article that I found, I really like it because of the fact that it talks about general population. We've seen how exercise affects stress in general when we are talking about certain populations, and how it can be beneficial for those who have certain conditions like cancer or high blood pressure, maybe diabetes, things of that sort. But we haven't looked at general population, meaning the rest of the individuals, and how does exercise and stress play a role in them. So that's why I really like this research article done by Sharon David and Tenenbaum, 2017, out in Florida. And the research article is called Effectiveness of Exercise Interventions on Coping with Stress. So this is a research synthesis, meaning that it takes a bunch of research articles and studies that were done, and then it compiles kind of like this general feeling findings that they get from it. I'm going to have a link on my website so you can check it out. But basically, before we start into some of the science of it, stress. How many of us are actually dealing with stress? Well, they did a survey recently, 2020, and they found that over 2/3 of Americans, of the US population, is dealing with some kind of symptoms of stress. Over 2/3. That's insane. That's a lot of individuals. So obviously this is something that we need to address, right? So some of those symptoms of stress that they specifically talked about were fatigue, irritability, anger, or sleep irregularities. Well, in general, we know that stress can affect your sleep. If you're super stressed out, you may not be getting good sleep. Also, on the return of it, if you're not getting good sleep, that increases your stress hormone, your cortisol levels. It can also affect your hunger. If you're not getting good sleep, then you might be more hungry because you need to feed the brain. It can also mean that if you're not getting a lot of good sleep, you're going to be tired or fatigued, you're going to be irritable, and you can be short-tempered too. So this kind of makes sense as to the symptoms of stress when we look at, especially with the relationship with sleep. Now, there are long-term effects with having stress constantly present. We have two terms. It's called acute or chronic. Now, chronic is a long-term effect. Chronic is when it's anywhere from 3 to 6 months and further. Acute is very short-term. Acute can be a day. It could be a couple hours. It could be a couple weeks, but it goes away. So when we have stressful situations and more of this negative stressful situations constantly being present, that's going to have an effect on our body and our mental health. Some of the things that were mentioned in this article was that it's going to increase your heart rate, your blood pressure. So this is where we get into that hypertension state, and that can be detrimental to your heart health. It can increase your depression or mental health illnesses. Another one being like anxiety. Increase cortisol levels. So cortisol is kind of that hormone that's going to be present in any stressful situation, and you're going to have just a chronic state of that cortisol increase. Now that can affect your menstrual health. If you're constantly stressed out, progesterone can be decreased because cortisol and progesterone are going to work inversely related to each other. And then also too, changes with immune and nervous system. So if you see me glancing over, I'm just looking at my notes, making sure I get everything that I wanted to chat about. All right. Now, I mentioned briefly about how we perceive stress and how we cope with it, right? You can perceive stress as a positive thing or a negative thing. You can perceive stress as, okay, how am I going to work through this, right? We can look at 2020 and be like, that was the most stressful year. I'm going to hide. And that's one way of dealing with it. But you can also look at 2020 and be like, okay, 2020 was one of the craziest years. It was stressful, but how can I learn from it? What things did I find that I need to change to make sure that I'm still happy and healthy? That's a different way of looking at it, right? So we have maladaptive coping mechanisms and adaptive coping mechanisms. And so these researchers indicated that maladaptive coping mechanisms are known as like denial, venting, or resourcing to like substances, alcohol, or drug abuse, and then also to self-blame. So if you're utilizing these practices, sometimes it could be negative towards our health because we're not really coping with it, but maybe not in the most beneficial way for our body and our mental health. Now, adaptive is found to be much more of a positive coping mechanism style. And different ways of incorporating adaptive coping mechanisms are humor, positive reframing. So that's kind of that analogy with 2020 and 2021. How can I look at this differently? How can I learn from this and what can I gain from this rather than just saying, okay, that was super stressful. I'm not going to look at it at all or assess it because it makes me uncomfortable. Stress can be uncomfortable for sure, and that's not very fun, but we can learn a lot being in that state. Also too, adaptive coping can mean acceptance. So accepting those uncomfortable positions, and learning how to not always be in them or how to work through it. And then lastly, my favorite is exercise. So exercise, yes, is a stressor, but it does have an adaptive coping mechanism to your stress. And I have always found that exercise has been kind of like my go-to for whenever I am in a very stressful situation. I do much better if I go and exercise. But then again, I am a kinesiology major and I love exercise, so I may have a different perspective on it than you do. But regardless, it is going to be very beneficial for you. So anywho, some cool things that I found with this research article is because they pulled from all these different areas of studies that were done, they were able to see various groups of populations. So we have firefighters that were mentioned in here, elderly, the workplace, you have your sedentary young adults, as well as students. So I like it because it gives you an array of those populations and tells you a quick analogy or quick findings as to what they found with them. So we're going to talk about those real quick. The firefighters. So each of these populations did their own exercise regimen or protocol. So it could have been 6 weeks, it could have been 12 weeks, 20 weeks, it could have been whatever the case may be. It just was different among them. So I'm just talking about the findings. Of course, if you're really interested in this, again, you can go to my website and check this research article out to really look at it. But with the firefighter group, when an exercise program was implemented, it improved the stress reactivity, okay? Now, also with the elderly, it decreased mental health symptoms. So when we're talking about mental health symptoms, that could be anything of depression, anxiety, or even hostility. Elderly individuals face a lot of stressors. Like you can think of fear, financial issues, being socially distant just in general from their family, if they're in a home. There's a lot of stressors that they may come across. And so having them go through an exercise program was very beneficial for them. And they found that these individuals had a greater use of coping styles. So that's something as a takeaway. We really want to be able to get to a place where we can use better coping styles so that when we do encounter stressful situations, because it's going to happen, that we're not always having this elevated stress level, that instead we're able to kind of like mitigate it. We're trying to like lower that stressful state or that perception of stress. They also looked at the workplace. So I find this to be super important because, unless you are loaded, you're going to be working, and hopefully you're working in a place that you really enjoy. But if you're not, or let's say that you're working a ton, then maybe, the workplace is going to have a greater level of stress on you. But within the workplace, they found that if they incorporated dancing, so dancing is an aerobic exercise, they had them going, I think it was 13 weeks, had them going outside to an outside facility doing dancing, and they found that these individuals had improved perception of quality of life. And so that basically just means how they see their life and how great it is, or quality as in like when you look at like when you're buying something, do you buy quantity over quality? The quantity being the number or the quality of how great it is. So that's the same concept. Your quality of life, how good is it? So it did improve the perception of quality of life with these workplace individuals. It also improved these employees' physical and psychological health, which totally makes sense as we look at exercise in general in how it's going to improve physical health, but also to psychological health. As even stated with the elderly, how it helped with those symptoms of depression or anxiety. Now, another subgroup was the sedentary young adults. Now, sedentary means that they're not exercising or they're not moving more than 30 minutes a day. So you're basically sitting all day long, which if you think about it, we get up from our bed, we go sit down to eat, we then go to school or we go to work, we're sitting all day, we come home, sit on the couch, and then we go and lay down and go to bed. Now, that's pretty sedentary if you're not doing a lot of moving in between there or incorporating exercise. Sedentary is a whole other topic that we can get into later on. But with these sedentary young adults being about, I think it was 18 to 30 years old, when they had been in an exercise program, they were in either a weight training program, an aerobic, meaning running, cycling, dancing, anything of that sort, and then no exercise group, that's a control. So they're trying to compare the the three groups together. Those who were in the aerobic exercise group had a better response to this psychological stress test that they had done after the intervention. So they did the exercise programs for several weeks, and then they did this psychological stressor, and those who were in that aerobic exercise group had lower heart rate and systolic blood pressure. So it's really interesting to see that the aerobic side helps with that physiological, but also to mental. It's interesting because I always felt like when I was super stressed out, I needed to go for a run. I needed to go for a bike ride or a swim, and something aerobic to really help me. I love weight training, absolutely love it. And I think it should be incorporated in everyone's programming. But there's just something about that aerobic exercise that I always felt really helped with the mental clarity. So it's interesting to see how it had a different effect than weight training. And then lastly, students. Now, students, this I tell my students all the time, make sure you exercise, especially during exam week. I'm always stressing to them to exercise. And a lot of them will roll their eyes at me and it's whatever, fine, I get it. But really, truly, I've come across several studies with students and exercise, and it does help them. And so what they found here was that it decreased fatigue, and it decreased psychological and physiological stress during that examination period time, like midterm week, finals week, whatever the case may be, right? During that exam time frame, those stress levels were reduced. So that's a positive thing. We're looking at, where they then can perhaps retain information better. They could perhaps be able to perform better on those exams. So students, if you're out there, get your exercise in and get your sleep in too. I love that part of it right there. All right, now there's a few theories. I'm not going to go into all of these just because of the fact that it's going to make this video really long. But basically what they're getting at as to why exercise helps with stress is that there's a lot of different theories or thoughts as to why it helps. Now, some of them are based off of like it forces you to distract yourself. Like you're not focusing on those negative things. You're able to pull away. I know when I'm in a very stressful situation and I go on a run, and I may think about it for the first part, and then it slowly starts to go away, and I feel that stress melting away, right? Or like I start being distracted from that thought. There's also the thought of mastering something, so that like if it's complicated or if it's challenging for you to exercise, then being able to master that skill of exercise is helpful too with the stress. And that's going to help just in the thought process of even you growing and you getting better at something. There's also if you're doing it in a social environment, team efforts, or if you're having a buddy to help you out or a workout buddy, then that's going to be beneficial too. And then there's also, of course, biological responses that are going to occur. You may have heard how there's like the release of serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, all those things. Well, this research article talked about how, yes, that increased synaptic transmission of monoamines. That's basically what the release of those, the serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline is. But they're saying that it may not be substantial enough to be able to claim that that's what it is. But still, there's that biological response. And there's also a biological response with having an activation of endorphins, and how in your plasma level, like in the blood, it's going to be, those endorphins are going to be elevated after exercise. And that's just physiological responses that occur. So there's numerous reasons or thoughts as to why this is working, or why exercise is beneficial on stress. And the main thing to take away from all this is that it's really important to understand that exercise can help you not only physically, but also too psychologically. Clear your mind, help you with the mental health, like your state of mind, with depression, anxiety, anything of that sort. It can help with reducing that stress level and the perception of stress. And one thing that I find that needs to really be highlighted is that you should find exercise that works for you. So a lot of people will say, I hate running. Okay, well, if you hate running, then you're going to perceive that as a negative stressor because you're stressed out about doing it and you don't want to do it. So don't do it. Just go and enjoy something that you do enjoy, or go and do something that you enjoy. So if that's walking, if that's dancing, if it's lifting weights, rock climbing, I don't care what it is. Just go do something exercise related to help those stress levels. And also to just for your own health, like general physical health. So, anyway, I hope that this helps kind of like in a real quick recap as to how, one, exercise helps with stress, how stress affects our body in general. So we talked about the increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, cortisol levels, all that, how chronic levels can be detrimental to our health. We also talked about how there's different ways of perceiving stressors and that we can work through more of those adaptive perceptions or adaptive coping mechanisms to help with the perception and to help reduce those stress levels. And then also too, just knowing that there's been a lot of research that has been done on various groups, whether it is groups with pre-existing conditions, or it's groups of students or workplace or whatever the case may be. And generally it's coming to conclude that the findings keep saying exercise helps stress levels. So if there's anything that can be done, just go and exercise, do something that works best for you. And if you're a beginner at exercise, I really recommend that you find something that is going to be based off of you, because the thing is that you got to stick with it, right? You can't just do it one time and then say, oh, my stress for the next year is done. It's been decreased. You got to keep working at it. So whether you're new at something, or if you are, still hitting the pavement, or whatever the case may be, if you're an expert at this, find something that you enjoy with it. And that you may find challenging, because that's going to help you in the long term of sticking with it. So I hope you enjoyed this quick video on stress and exercise, and I hope it encourages you to get a little bit more exercise in to decrease those stress levels. All right, I will see you next time. Have a great one. And if you want to check out that research article that I was referring to, you can head over to my website, www.thedanijonesmethod, DANIJONES method.com, and I'll have it there in one of my blogs. All right. So have a great day, and I'll see y'all next time.